The evening was calm, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. The streets were quiet, only filled with the sound of footsteps, bicycles passing, and the occasional car driving by. On one of those streets walked a young boy just 16 years old, carrying nothing but his sports bag. His clothes were simple, just a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. To anyone else, he looked like a regular teenager heading home after practice, tired but satisfied with his day. But to a pair of patrolling police officers, he was something else. Something they had already decided in their minds before even speaking to him. The boy didn't notice the police car at first. He was busy adjusting the strap of his bag and humming to himself. He had just left the community sports center where he played basketball with his friends. His coach had praised him that evening for improving his defense skills. Those words still echoed in his head, and he couldn't wait to tell his mother when he got home. He walked with a little bounce in his step, proud of himself. Then suddenly he heard the sound of a car pulling up beside him. A window rolled down and a voice called out sharply, "Hey, you there!" "Stop for a second." The boy froze, confused. He turned his head slowly and saw the police car. His heart skipped a beat. He had never been in trouble before. His grades were good, his teachers liked him, and his mother always reminded him to stay respectful and careful outside. He wondered if he had dropped something or if there was some mistake. "Yes, sir," he said politely. The officer stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the boy from head to toe. "What are you doing out here?" The boy blinked, unsure how to answer. "I'm just walking home. From practice." He lifted his bag a little as if that would explain everything. The officer's partner came out too. She crossed her arms and frowned. "You look nervous. What are you hiding?" "Hiding? Nothing," the boy replied quickly, panic rising in his chest. He had seen videos of police stops before, and he knew this could go wrong if he said the wrong thing. The first officer stepped closer. "Empty your bag," the boy hesitated. "It's just clothes and my shoes. Do it now," the officer barked. With shaky hands, the boy unzipped his bag and showed them his sweaty jersey, his sneakers, and a water bottle. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. Just the belongings of a kid heading home. Still, the officers exchanged a look. One of them said in a low voice, "Fits the description." The boy's heart pounded. What description? He hadn't done anything. He wanted to ask, but his throat felt dry. "We've had reports of some suspicious activity in the area," the first officer said. "You're coming with us." The boy's eyes widened. "But I didn't do anything. I swear I was just at practice." The officer grabbed his arm firmly. "You can explain that at the station." People passing by started to notice. A couple walking their dog slowed down. A man at the corner shop came out to see what was happening. The boy felt all their eyes on him. His cheeks burned with shame and fear. He wanted to scream, to call for his mother, but the words wouldn't come out. He remembered what his mother always told him. "Stay calm. Don't argue. Just come home safe." So he stayed quiet, swallowing the lump in his throat as the officers put him in the back of the car. The ride to the station felt endless. The boy stared at his hands, his sports bag on the seat beside him. His mind raced with questions. Why me? Did I look suspicious just because of what I was wearing? Was it because of how I looked? Would they even listen when I told them the truth? At the station, things only got worse. The officers checked him in like he was already guilty. They didn't ask if he wanted to call home right away. They just told him to sit and wait. He sat on the hard bench, trying to stay strong, but his body trembled. Every second that passed felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He thought of his mother, probably waiting at home cooking dinner and wondering why he was late. He thought of his younger sister, who always asked him to bring her a chocolate bar after practice. They would both be worried sick. Hours went by before they finally let him make a phone call. His hand shook as he dialed his home number. "Mom?" His voice cracked the moment he heard her answer. "They took me. The police took me." On the other end of the line, his mother's voice was sharp and filled with panic. "What? Why? What happened?" "I don't know," he whispered. "They said I looked suspicious. They won't believe me." There was a long pause, then his mother's voice came back stronger, steadier. "Don't worry. I'm coming right now. Just stay calm." When she arrived at the station, she walked in with urgency, her eyes scanning every corner until they landed on her son. The moment she saw him sitting there, tired, confused, and scared, her heart broke. But at the same time, Something inside her hardened. She marched up to the desk and demanded answers. Why is my son here? What has he done? The officer behind the desk barely looked up. He matched a description. We're checking things out. That's not an answer, she shot back. What description? What evidence? He's 16. He was at practice. Look at him, he doesn't belong here. The officer's dismissive tone only fueled her anger. Ma'am, calm down. We're just doing our job. Doing your job? She repeated, her voice trembling with fury. Your job is to protect children, not drag them off the street without reason. Other officers in the room turned their heads. Some avoided her gaze while others looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Her son watched quietly from the bench, his chest swelling with both relief and fear. Relief because his mother was here fighting for him. Fear because he didn't know if even she could get him out quickly. She turned back to him, softening her voice. Don't worry. I won't leave without you. In that moment, the boy realized something powerful. His mother wasn't just his protector at home, reminding him to do homework or cook dinner. She was a fighter, and now she was about to fight the whole system if she had to. That night was only the beginning. What started as a routine walk home had turned into a nightmare. But neither the boy nor his mother knew yet how far this would go, or how much their lives and the lives of others were about to change. The station was cold and unwelcoming. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow across the room. The boy sat quietly on the bench, still trying to understand why he was there. His mother, on the other hand, stood tall and unshaken. She had walked in with fear, but now that fear had burned into anger. Her son was sitting in a police station, treated like a criminal, and she knew deep down that this was not a mistake. It was prejudice, plain and simple. She demanded to speak to the officers in charge. They gave her vague responses, told her to sit and wait, and treated her like she was just another upset parent. But she wasn't just upset, she was furious. Every time an officer brushed her off, she wrote down his name. Every time someone spoke rudely to her, she noted the time and the words they used. She wasn't sure what she would do with it yet, but something told her that every detail mattered. When she was finally allowed to speak to her son, she walked over and knelt down so their eyes were level. His face was pale, his hands were trembling, and he looked younger than his 16 years. She forced a small smile to calm him. You're going to be okay, she whispered. I'm here now. He nodded weakly. They think I did something, but I didn't. I told them. I know, she said softly, touching his arm. You don't need to convince me. We'll get through this. Then she stood up, turned back to the officers, and her voice hardened again. Where is the evidence? What law did he break? One of the officers shrugged. He matched a description. That's enough for us to check things out. Matched a description? She repeated sharply. Do you even hear yourself? He's a child walking home with a sports bag. What exactly looks dangerous about that? The officer avoided her eyes, muttered something about procedure, and walked away. That moment confirmed everything she had suspected. They didn't see her son as a child. They didn't see him as a student, a teammate, a brother, or a son. They saw him as a threat simply because of how he looked. And she wasn't going to let them get away with it. When she realized they weren't going to release him anytime soon, she pulled out her phone. She called a lawyer she had once heard about through a community group. Then she called a family friend who was active in local rights organizations. Then, without hesitation, she opened her social media app and started typing. She wrote with her heart pounding in her chest. My 16-year-old son has been taken by police for no reason. He was walking home from practice when they stopped him, said he looked dangerous, and now he's sitting in a cell like a criminal. This is not justice. This is not protection. This is prejudice. She attached a photo of his basketball shoes still in his sports bag and hit post. Within minutes, her phone began to buzz with notifications. Friends commented, offering support. Neighbors shared the post. Strangers began asking for more details. She didn't stop there. She kept updating, writing down everything that was happening inside the station. They won't tell me what he's accused of. They won't show me any evidence. They just keep saying he fits a description. This is how they treat our children. By the time an hour had passed, dozens of people were outside the station. Some were neighbors, some were friends, and some were complete strangers who had seen her post online and decided to show up. They stood quietly at first, holding up their phones, recording. The officers inside noticed the crowd forming and grew uneasy, but the mother didn't stop. She asked one of the supporters to go live on social media while she spoke. With her son's face fresh in her mind, she stood outside the station, her voice shaking but strong enough for everyone to hear. "My boy is inside," she said, pointing at the building. "He is 16 years old. He has never been in trouble, not once. He was walking home from basketball practice and they dragged him in here like he's a criminal. And when I asked why, do you know what they told me? They told me he looked suspicious. They told me he looked dangerous. Since when does being a child make you dangerous? Since when does carrying your sports bag home make you suspicious?" The crowd grew louder with murmurs and gasps. Phones stayed raised, capturing every word. Inside, officers watched from the windows, clearly uncomfortable. She continued, her voice rising now with both pain and power. "I will not sit quietly while they treat my son like this, and I will not sit quietly while they treat anyone else's child like this. Enough is enough." The crowd clapped and cheered in agreement. Cars slowed down as drivers honked in support. People began chanting for justice, their voices echoing through the street. Back inside, her son could hear the noise through the walls. For the first time since being taken, he felt hope. His mother was out there fighting for him. He wasn't invisible anymore. As the night stretched on, the mother stayed firm. She refused to leave. Every time an officer tried to dismiss her concerns, she made sure the crowd heard. Every time someone tried to intimidate her, she spoke louder. She knew that if she backed down now, they would walk all over her son's future. By midnight, local reporters had arrived. Cameras and microphones appeared. The story began to spread beyond social media. The mother stood in front of the cameras, her face tired but determined, and repeated everything she had already said. The world needed to hear it. Her son's name and photo were never shared publicly. She was careful to protect him, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about one boy. It was about every child who had been judged unfairly, every family who had felt powerless in the face of authority. When the officers finally allowed her to see her son again, she looked him in the eye and said, "You're not alone. The whole community is standing with you now." He nodded, a small flicker of strength returning to his tired face. That night, she went home with her son still in custody, but she knew the fight had only begun. She had planted a seed, and now it was growing into something bigger than she could have imagined. What started as one mother's outrage was quickly turning into a movement. The officers thought they could dismiss her. They thought she would cry, beg, and then give up. But they were wrong. She was just getting started, and the system that had so easily dismissed her son was about to feel the weight of a mother's determination and an entire community's voice. The following morning felt different in the neighborhood. Word of what had happened the previous night spread quickly. People were talking in shops, on buses, even in school hallways. Everyone had heard about the boy taken in by the police for looking dangerous. Some were shocked, some were angry, and many were not surprised at all. They had seen this story before, just with different faces. The mother woke up after only a few hours of restless sleep. Her son was still not home, and that thought alone gave her the energy she needed to keep going. She brewed a cup of tea but didn't even drink it. She sat at the table with her phone in one hand and a notebook in the other, scribbling down every detail she remembered from the night before. Times, faces, exact words. She wrote it all down. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Neighbors, relatives, strangers, all offering support. Some were asking how they could help. Others were sending stories of similar things that had happened to their children, their brothers, or their cousins. She realized quickly that this was bigger than just her son. Around mid-morning, she met with a lawyer from a local civil rights group. The lawyer sat across the table, listening carefully as she explained everything. He nodded slowly, his face growing more serious with every detail. "What they did was wrong," he said. "You were smart to write everything down. We'll need that. We'll also need witnesses, any recordings, anything you can gather." "I'll get it all," she replied firmly. "I'm not going to let them destroy his future because of their prejudice." The lawyer promised to file an official complaint against the department. He also advised her to keep using her voice, to keep the attention on the case. "They don't like the light," he said. "When people are watching, they can't hide," so she kept posting online. She shared how her son was still being held with no evidence. She shared how officers had dismissed her concerns. She reminded everyone that this could happen to any child walking home. Her posts were short but powerful, written from the heart. By afternoon, her story was trending in the city. Hashtags appeared. Community leaders began sharing it. Local news stations called her, asking for interviews. She agreed, not because she wanted attention, but because every camera meant more people would know the truth. When she stood in front of those cameras, she didn't try to sound perfect. She didn't rehearse lines. She just spoke like a mother whose son was taken without reason. She told the world how he was an ordinary boy, how he loved sports, how he helped her around the house, and how his biggest dream was to earn a scholarship one day. She said the police didn't see any of that. They saw a threat when all they should have seen was a child. The response was overwhelming. Parents from other neighborhoods began calling her, sharing their own painful stories. Activists reached out to organize a march. Teachers from her son's school sent letters of support. The simple truth she had spoken resonated deeply with people who had been silent for too long. That evening, she stood outside the station again, this time joined by hundreds of people. They held signs that read, "Justice for our children and we deserve fairness." Some held candles, others chanted. The street was filled with voices, a sea of determination. The police inside could no longer ignore it. Reporters were camped outside. Cameras flashed constantly. Every move the officers made was being recorded. The department released a brief statement saying they were reviewing the situation, but it wasn't enough. The mother knew they were only stalling, hoping the noise would fade. She refused to let that happen. When she was finally allowed inside to see her son again, she noticed the change in him. He looked tired, his eyes heavy, but there was also a spark of hope when he saw her. He whispered, "I heard them outside. Is that for me?" She smiled softly and brushed his hair back. "Yes, they're all here for you. You're not alone anymore." He swallowed hard, trying to be brave, but she could see how frightened he still was. She held his hand tightly. "This isn't just about you now. It's about everyone who's been treated this way. We're going to fight, and we're going to win." As the protests grew, so did the pressure on city officials. Calls flooded into the mayor's office. Letters poured into the police department. People demanded answers. Why was a 16-year-old still being held with no charges? What exactly was the description he supposedly matched? Behind the scenes, the department scrambled. They searched for anything they could use to justify their actions, but there was nothing. The boy had done nothing wrong. The longer they held him, the worse they looked. The mother knew this was the moment to push harder. She gathered with community leaders in her living room late into the night, planning their next steps. They decided to hold a rally at City Hall. They prepared speeches, gathered petitions, and contacted more journalists. She barely slept, but she didn't care. Every ounce of her energy was focused on bringing her son home and holding the system accountable. 2 days later, the rally at City Hall was larger than anyone expected. The crowd stretched down the street, people holding signs, chanting, and demanding justice. The mother stood at the front with a microphone in her hand. She looked out at the crowd, students, parents, grandparents, people of all backgrounds, and felt her knees shake. For a moment, she wondered if she could really do this. Then she thought of her son, sitting in that cell, and her fear melted away. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "They thought they could silence us. They thought they could take my son and make us believe it was normal. But look around you. Look at how many of us are here. We are not silent. We are not powerless. And we will not stop until justice is done." The crowd erupted in cheers. People lifted their fists, their voices echoing through the city. Reporters captured every second. Officials inside City Hall were forced to listen. That speech was the turning point. The story was no longer just a local issue. It was now a national one. Bigger news stations picked it up. Commentators debated it on television. Politicians began making statements. The mother's voice, once ignored inside the police station, was now shaking the whole system outside of it. Through it all, she stayed focused on one thing: her son. She knew he was still scared, still waiting, and she promised herself she wouldn't rest until he walked out free. And though the fight was far from over, something had already changed. The police had expected her to break down quietly, but instead she rose stronger. What they saw as one boy's arrest had become the spark for an entire movement, and the system that had dismissed her family so easily was beginning to feel the pressure of a mother's determination and the power of a united community. The noise outside the city hall didn't fade away the next day. If anything, it grew louder. The rally had lit a fire that no one could ignore anymore. Newspapers ran front-page stories about the boy who was taken for looking dangerous. TV channels replayed the mother's speech again and again, calling her the voice of courage. Radio stations opened their lines for callers, and people poured out their anger, telling their own experiences. The story was no longer just about one child. It had become a mirror showing how unfair the system could be. Inside the police department, pressure was building. Officers were told not to speak to the press. The chief held closed meetings trying to control the damage. But the more they tried to defend themselves, the more questions people asked. Where was the evidence? Why was a teenager still being held after days? Why did it take hundreds of people in the streets for them to even answer? The mother, despite being exhausted, didn't slow down. Every morning she went back to the station. Every afternoon she spoke with reporters or community leaders. Every evening she posted updates online. She was everywhere, her voice steady and unshaken. She reminded everyone that this wasn't just about her son. It was about every child who had been judged unfairly before they even opened their mouths. One evening she was invited to speak at a town meeting. The hall was packed with people standing shoulder to shoulder. The mayor sat at the front, along with city council members and the police chief. For the first time, the officials couldn't avoid her face to face. When she stood at the microphone, she took a deep breath. "My son has been in your custody for days," she began, her voice calm but strong. "You said he matched a description. You said he looked suspicious, but you have not shown me one single piece of evidence. Not one, and you expect me, his mother, to accept that?" The room was silent. Every eye was on her. She could feel the weight of the moment, but she didn't falter. "My son is not dangerous," she continued. "He is not a suspect. He is a child who should be home doing his homework, not sitting in a cold cell because someone decided his face, his clothes, or his walk looked wrong. And let me tell you this, I will not stop until he is free. I will not stop until every child is free from this kind of treatment." The crowd erupted in applause, clapping and cheering so loudly that the mayor had to wait several minutes before he could speak. The officials gave the usual promises. "We are looking into the matter. We take this seriously. We will investigate." But the mother had learned enough to know those were just words. She didn't want promises. She wanted action. The very next morning, the pressure became impossible to ignore. News channels revealed old reports of similar arrests in the same city. Stories of other teenagers being stopped for no reason began to surface. Some cases were years old, forgotten by most, but now they were resurfacing like wounds reopening. Journalists questioned the police department's history of profiling, and the city found itself under national scrutiny. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. The officers released the boy without charges. He walked out of the station with tired eyes and a heavy heart, but at least he was free. His mother wrapped her arms around him tightly, holding him as if she never wanted to let go. The crowd that had gathered outside cheered, some crying, some shouting in joy. For a brief moment it felt like victory, but the mother knew it wasn't the end. She whispered to her son, "We're not done. They can't just let you go and think that's enough. We're going to make sure they answer for this." She kept pushing. She demanded the release of body camera footage from the night of the arrest. She filed complaints not just with the local department but with state authorities. She stood side by side with lawyers, activists, and community leaders calling for transparency. The city was forced to launch an independent investigation. That alone was a huge step, but the mother didn't celebrate yet. She knew investigations could drag on for months or years, and she wasn't going to let this one disappear quietly. She kept speaking at rallies, she kept posting updates, and she kept telling the story of her son. Her determination inspired others. More parents began attending meetings. More young people shared their experiences of being stopped and questioned for no reason. Schools organized discussions. Churches opened their doors for community forums. What started as one arrest had become a movement that was changing the city's heartbeat. Through it all, the boy tried to return to his routine. He went back to practice, back to school, back to his friends. But he was different now. The fear he had felt in that cell didn't vanish overnight. Sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night, thinking he was still locked up. Sometimes he stayed quiet when his friends laughed, lost in thoughts he couldn't explain. His mother noticed it all. She sat with him at night, held his hand, and told him, "You are stronger than they know. And because of you, change is coming." One evening, when she was preparing dinner, he came into the kitchen and said softly, I want to speak too. I want people to know what happened to me." She paused, looking at him with both pride and worry. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from more pain. But she also knew he had a voice that mattered. She nodded slowly. "If you're ready, then I'll stand beside you." A week later, he joined her on stage at a rally. His voice was shaky at first, but the crowd listened intently. "When they put me in the car," he said, "I thought I would never come home again. I thought my life was over before it even started. But when I heard my mom outside shouting for me, I knew I wasn't alone. I want to thank everyone who stood outside, everyone who raised their voice. You gave me hope. And I don't want this to happen to anyone else." The crowd applauded loudly, some wiping away tears. His words, simple but raw, touched everyone. That night, the mother realized something had shifted. It was no longer just her fight. It was their fight, hers, her son's, and the entire community's. Together, they were demanding change, and the city had no choice but to listen. The police department suspended the officers involved pending the investigation. For the first time, accountability seemed possible, and while it didn't erase the pain of those days, it was proof that their voices were making cracks in the wall that had stood for so long. The mother lay awake that night, her son asleep in the next room. She thought about how everything had started with one ordinary evening, one walk home, one unfair stop. She thought about how scared she had been in the beginning, and then she thought about where they were now, standing in front of crowds shaking the system that had once silenced so many. She whispered to herself in the dark, "We're not done yet. This is only the beginning." The city had changed. What began as a quiet evening with one boy walking home had turned into weeks of protests, rallies, and endless conversations about fairness, prejudice, and justice. People who had once stayed silent now spoke out. Parents who had hidden their fears now shared them openly. The system, once untouched and unquestioned, was now standing under the brightest light it had seen in years. The independent investigation moved forward, and for the first time, officers who were usually protected by silence found themselves facing real consequences. Several of them were suspended while the review continued. Others were called in for questioning. The department, which once brushed off the mother's anger as nothing, was now forced to listen. But it wasn't just about punishment anymore. The pressure had grown into something bigger. Community leaders were demanding reform. Students organized marches after school. Churches and community centers hosted meetings where people came up with new ideas to protect young people from unfair treatment. It wasn't just anger. It was action. The mother stood in the middle of all this, no longer just a parent fighting for her own child, but a leader carrying the voices of many. She had never wanted this role, but it had chosen her. She accepted it because she knew silence was no longer an option. She kept speaking at events, but her message became broader. "This is not just about my son anymore," she told the crowds. "This is about every child who deserves to walk home safe. This is about every parent who deserves to sleep at night without fear." Her son, slowly recovering from the trauma of being taken, began to find his own strength. At first, he only listened quietly at the rallies. Then he started speaking a few words. Over time, he grew bolder, his voice stronger. People listened to him not because he was a polished speaker, but because he spoke from the heart. He told them how it felt to be treated like a criminal when all he had done was walk home. He told them about the fear in his chest when the car door closed on him, and he told them about the hope he felt when he heard the crowd outside chanting his name. His honesty touched people more deeply than any political speech ever could. He became a symbol of resilience, a reminder of why the fight mattered. His mother stood proudly beside him each time, watching him grow stronger, even as he carried scars no one could see. The pressure reached a point where the city could no longer delay. Officials announced new measures. An independent oversight committee would now review complaints against officers. Body cameras would be checked regularly, and the footage would be made accessible in cases of disputes. Training programs on bias and fairness were introduced for all officers. It was not perfect, but it was progress. Something people had demanded for years, finally forced into existence by one mother's determination. When the announcement was made, The mother didn't celebrate wildly. She stood quietly with her son, holding his hand, knowing that while this was a victory, the road was still long. Change in paper did not always mean change in reality, but it was a start, and that mattered. Her son looked at her with curious eyes. "Does this mean it's over?" he asked. She shook her head softly. "No, it means we've opened the door. Now we have to keep walking through it." The boy nodded, understanding more than she expected. He had grown in ways no 16-year-old should have to, but he also carried wisdom now born from experience and pain. Months passed and the story continued to echo. Other cities called her, asking her to speak about her fight. She traveled to schools, telling children about their rights, reminding them that their lives had value. She stood in front of parents, encouraging them to stand together, to never allow fear to silence them. She never once asked for recognition. She only wanted her son and children like him to live in a world that saw them as human first. Her son found comfort in basketball again. Every time he stepped onto the court, he felt a piece of himself return. The sound of the ball hitting the ground, the cheers from his friends, the laughter after a good play. It all reminded him that he was more than what had happened to him. He was not defined by those few days in a cell. He was defined by his dreams, his efforts, and the love of a community that had stood by him. One evening after practice, he sat with his mother on the porch. The air was cool and the sky was filled with stars. "Do you think things will really change?" he asked. She looked up at the night sky for a moment before answering. "Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly like the stars moving. But once it starts, it can't be stopped. And you, my son, you are part of that change." He smiled faintly, leaning against her shoulder. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The city remembered their story. It became one people told whenever they spoke about courage, about justice, about how one voice could ripple into many. Some called it the case that shook the system. Others called it the moment the community woke up. For the mother and her son, it would always be the time when their ordinary life was turned upside down, but also the time when they discovered just how powerful love, courage, and unity could be. And so, what began with a simple walk home ended with a lesson for an entire city. That prejudice may try to silence, but truth has a way of being heard. That fear may try to break families apart, but love can make them stronger. And that one, determined mother standing up for her child, can shake an entire system and remind it of the humanity it too often forgets.